Coach Jim Johnson, welcome to Live Inspired with John O'Leary.
Thanks, John. Really great to talk to you. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
I've been looking forward to this one for so long. I knew about you first through social media. Then I read a little bit about your bio. Then I read a little bit about your success, which was overwhelming. And then I read a little bit through your book about the man who has driven that success by focusing on the right stuff.
Yeah.
So let's sit down on the bench together. If I had known none of this stuff about you, though, and I said, Jim, huh? That's your first name. Tell me about you. What would you say that you do professionally these days?
I'm someone right now, my whole focus of where I am in my life is to try to help others be the best they can be. I have one of my presentations called Dreams Really Do Come True. And when I saw my young man, Jason, have a dream come true, it's like, you know what, that's what I'm put on this earth for, is just to help all different. Obviously, I was a high school basketball coach and teacher for over 3 decades. So I love those, making an impact with young people. But I love helping all kinds of age people, because everybody has a dream, but I think a lot of people don't believe their dream can come true.
Well, the cool thing about yours is yours have come true because you've helped those who are making their dreams come true first.
Mhm.
So
Right.
in the manner in which you poured into others, man, you've achieved greatness. We'll talk about that greatness and the others and some of the real stars along the way. But I'm going to go way back in time, although not that far from where you and I are having the conversation today. I know you grew up outside of Rochester, New York. Talk about your childhood. What was life like for you as a little kid?
Well, I was the oldest of six, so I got treated real well early, and then there became so many of us. So it was, in fact, my wife always kids me that I eat really fast, and she says, "I think it's because you had to get everything in before your brothers and sisters got to the
She's
table."
right.
But we were very much a sports family. My dad was my high school basketball coach, and we lost him about a year and a half ago, but he lived 90 years, and he was a beautiful man, and he was my model. He was my hero growing up, and I just learned so much from him, from his example. I played all kinds of sports growing up. Basketball became my number one love in high school. I became a pretty good high school player, but probably a lot better in my mind than I actually was. I got cut from my college basketball team, so that was a pretty humbling experience. But it really helped me because my real dream is I did want to follow my dad's footsteps. I wanted to be a phys ed teacher and a high school coach. And I coached a lot of sports, but basketball is my number one love. I coached it for 30 years as I had coached in four different high schools, the last two in my hometown of all things, although I went to the other high school. There were three growing up. But so I feel like I've lived a very blessed life. I met my wife in college, my junior year, and we've been married almost 44 years now. So things have gone well, and we're blessed to have one son. And he did not follow him. My wife's a teacher as well,
Yeah.
but my son's an attorney. So from a financial standpoint, he made a lot more than our teachers did, but he's doing well.
So
Yeah.
let's go kind of step by step through some of what you talked about. The
Yeah.
first, as you said, I wanted to become a coach and a teacher. And I think most of us at that age, kids, teenagers into college, our dream is to become the player. We want to
Yeah.
be on the line, taking the shot with the clock winding down. And rare are the kids who dream of being coaches.
Right.
What was it about coaching that you
Well,
wanted to
I,
become?
I, I guess I got to retract a little bit, John, because as a high school player, I did want to play in the NBA. I'm
Okay.
not going to kid you and say that, I was going to. But, as I said, I played 1 year of college basketball. I transferred, and the positive news was I ended up meeting my wife in the new school. But the negative news was I didn't make the basketball team there. So that really kind of shattered, what my dream there, because I figured, well, if I'm not going to be able to play in college, I'm probably not going to play in the NBA.
You know what those is remarkable about that is most kids then and today, if they went to a school to play ball and then the coach who drew them there cut them, they would leave.
Yeah,
And you stayed, and in doing so for three more semesters, eventually you met a girl who you would be doing life with 4 decades later. And that
right.
somewhere in there, someone wiser than I can find it, but I think there's a lesson to be learned.
Yeah, good point. And but yeah, that's where I really I turned my dreams because I did go astray for a while. I got a little bit into especially drinking. Back then I'm kind of showing my age, but the drinking age in New York State was 18. So pretty much everybody in college at that time could drink legally. Now, drinking responsibly and drinking legally were two different things. But fortunately, my wife really helped me get back on, what I really wanted to do and be a teacher and a coach.
What was your first job after college?
So my first job is I got a part-time teaching job, and I coached three sports. I coached girls soccer, freshman basketball at my alma mater. That was the only year I ever coached. It was under the head coach that took over from my dad. And then I did a freshman baseball as well. And I did that for a few years. I became a JV coach, actually at the school I ended up being the head coach for my last 20 years. And then at 25, John, my dream came true. I became a head basketball coach at a school about 20 minutes from where I grew up. And I had done fairly well as a JV coach. I thought I knew everything. And of course, I led the team to 17 consecutive losses. And I was on an interim position and I did not get rehired. So that was a really humbling experience. My blessing was, and of course I didn't know at the time because I didn't feel very blessed after losing my job, was that I got hired to be a junior college assistant. And ironically, John, the guy's name was Bill Van Gundy. And for your followers that follow basketball, both his sons, Jeff and Stan, ended up being head coaches in the NBA. So that was a good guidance. But my true love was I wanted to be a high school head coach. And so after that year, I went back into the high school level. So.
You lose 17 straight. Besides humility, what else were you learning as you go on to the bench, send the boys out to play, and they come back with their heads hung low? And 17 consecutive losses as you wrap that first season. I mean, this is a scarlet letter you've got to wear. So in
Yeah.
addition to humility, what are you learning during that first season of defeat?
Well, I think it's a humility in the sense that, when you're young, a lot of times, in fact, we're really look forward to having you on our podcast later this year. That's one of the reasons I started the podcast because I wanted to help young and emerging leaders because I think a lot of people when they get into leadership think they know what they're doing, but they really don't. And that was my case. I thought I knew everything about basketball and I was going to turn this team around and it didn't work that way. So what the biggest lesson was that for me was that it humbled me and that I knew I needed a lot to learn. And actually, that's when I really started, John, getting into personal growth. As much as I was into basketball, I started the kind of the personal growth icons back in my era, where Zig Ziglar and Jim Rohn and Brian Tracy and
Yeah.
Tony Robbins and all those. And I became a junkie, and again, I'm showing my age, but I was listening to cassette tapes in my car all the time and all that stuff. So
Why not give up? You're young. You essentially fail out. You lost 17 in a row. You lose your
right.
job, and yet you don't lose your desire to figure this thing out and to do better going forward. Why not just hang up and say, you know what, I'll be a good gym teacher.
Yeah, it's a good question, but I think, what I learned is it did it for a while. It put a chip on my shoulder that I wanted to really prove that I could be a successful coach. I did get another opportunity after that year of junior college. I took over a much smaller high school, and we did much better than the first time. And then I got called into an opportunity to come back to my hometown, and that was my biggest challenge. We took over a program that was in really bad shape. They had won two games of two previous seasons, and it took us a while, but it was such a great learning experience. And then I realized because when I first got into it, as a coach of a sport, you're always like, I got to know enough about the sport. We got to win games. And, I'm not saying winning is important, but when I really started to understand more about life, I realized that I was put on to help these young people and make an impact. That became our mission statement. We wanted to develop winners on and off the court. And as a leader, I had to define that. What is winning on the court? What is winning off the court? And that's what the process that we were trying to do. When I changed that mindset, it was reflected because we started to do. In fact, I was very blessed. We didn't have a losing season my last 23 years in coaching, so we had a very good run. But then the other thing is I got known for about 10 years as the coach that couldn't win the big one. So that was the next step for me, where we'd have winning seasons, we get into our postseason tournament, and we would lose. And we did that for quite a while. And then that magical moment with JMac changed my life dramatically, way better than the championships that we ended up winning. So
Before we talk about JMac, which is a story worth tuning into and learning an awful lot more about, it's remarkable. So hang on for it. I believe you won 428 games in your career,
mhm.
which is incredible. And you lost several hundred, which is also painful. That's a lot of losses.
A
If you
lot
add
of
them all up,
losses,
man, it's
yeah.
a lot of times driving home with your tail between your legs.
Yeah,
What
yeah.
did you learn in losses that you can't learn in victory?
I think the thing that jumps out immediately, because you do, as much as losses are a lot more difficult than wins, is that you do learn from both, but you learn so much more for loss because you realize whatever you're doing, there's corrections that may, because the easy thing in sports is there's a scoreboard, so you're getting measured every time,
Yeah,
and so with that is that when you don't make that measurement the way you want it with a win, then you're always going back. And I think the hardest part as I got older and more mature, there were nights where we lost the game, but I felt pretty good because I
yeah,
felt like we played with great effort, and maybe the other team was just better.
yeah,
As a coach, that's hard to do. And then some of our greatest wins is when we were playing a team that I did think was better than us, and somehow we found a way to win. But the losses, because you put so much time into it, there's just agony. And
yeah.
the one thing that's nice about basketball is you usually play at least 2 games a week. So you play like a Tuesday or Wednesday night, and win or lose, you're right back at it. Often we played Wednesday, Friday. So, you play Wednesday night, win or lose, you're doing an assessment of the game, but now Thursday, you're preparing for the next game. So so that part is a positive. Where I did coach 1 year of football, and the hardest part about football, you lose on a Friday night, you got a whole week
Yes.
before you can play again.
When you were rebuilding struggling programs, what was the first thing you would change within the culture to pivot that program from being a losing program to being ultimately a successful one?
I do a presentation on culture because I think it's so important. And one of the best advice that I give leaders is that when you take over something, and a lot of times you take over something is because the previous leader didn't do a very good job. And in sports, it's very obvious. They've lost a lot of games. But the one thing that what I did, and especially my last 20 years, when I took over that program, the first thing I did was went on a listening tour. And I met with every single player that was coming back. I met with all the assistant coaches. I had to hire my one main assistant. So I interviewed a number of people. But I was just trying to get the feel of what they thought was good, what was not so good. And then after I listened and then when we took over that summer, was starting to share what we were all about, what I stood for, our expectations. And we started talking about what it was our program mission and what are our values, core values, and just trying to build that. Because, in talking about culture, John, I know you do a lot of work with leadership, is that people want to change it immediately, and
Yeah.
culture is a daily process. And what I give advice to leaders is it's really a couple things. Is one, what you recognize, and because people love to be recognized and consistently and specific praise. Like I always give the example, instead of saying nice job, Johnny, I might say, Johnny, that was awesome how you dove on the floor for that loose ball. That's what championship players do on championship teams. So there's very specific. But the other thing is that we forget is also what we tolerate. And
Mm.
so if you let little things go, like for example, like one of our things was you had to be on time. And, but if you let somebody come in a minute late, then 2 days later, somebody comes in 2 minutes late. But so we drew that line very quickly, that that was not acceptable. And so they have to know both what you're
Be
going to get.
specific with me because
Yep.
this is something every organization deals with and every family deals with,
Yeah.
let alone every coach.
Right.
So pretend that practice starts at 3:30 and your stud walks in at 3:31. What do you do, coach?
So that was all done in our preseason of what our expectations. We always had a goals and team rules meeting right after the team was chosen. It was at my house. We had lunch together, and I would get input from them. But then with our rules and consequences. But there was a couple what I call, I think a leader, you can't have 100 non-negotiables, but I think you have a few. And one of mine was non-negotiable is if you're late for practice, there was a consequence. Now, there was various different things we did, but I'll give you an example. I'll give you a short story. My second to last year, it was the best team I ever coached. We lost in the state finals and we were really good. And I had a kid that was our best player and he was only a sophomore. He came late to morning free throws. And if you come late to morning free throws, you don't start. Now, the hilarious thing is he was 6'6", and we're playing a kid that was going on a Division I scholarship that night that was 6'8". And the kid we brought in for him was 6'2". But the rule was you didn't start, and he didn't play the first 4 minutes. Now, fortunately, our team held together, but I'll never forget because my assistant coach that did not work in the school, every single player texted him and asked if he would talk me out of doing that. And he says, nope, that's a standard coach sets. And I know he's not going to change his mind. And that was something I learned, one of my people that I admired in coaching was John Wooden. I know a lot of stories about like with Bill Walton, and Bill Walton came in with a beard and he says, Bill, we don't do that here. Bill said, well, this is the way I express myself. He said, well, I appreciate your opinion and we're going to miss you. And Bill Walton loved playing for John Wooden, so that day he came back with no beard. But that's where clarity of leadership is, understanding what the boundaries, what you stand for, and communicating that consistently is so essential.
How do you hold that in your left hand and grace in your right? Because a lot of our listeners right now are grandparents, aunts,
Yeah,
uncles, parents. And listen, we all want our kids to pull their shoulders back and to do their best and to be at
right.
practice and to look people in the eye and shake their hand and hold the door open for the lady. Like, yes, and yes, and yes, and yes, and
Yeah.
yes. And we want to be people who model grace and love and mercy. So, Coach, I know you're not militant in the way you show up for others. Like, help me understand, yes, if you're late, there's a consequence. But also, John, let me tell you another story about where grace shows up.
But you brought up something that I think is hugely important as a leader is I kid people that you got to be the CST, the chief storyteller. And so one of the things that I did a lot of is sharing stories to our players of both warnings and examples. And I also do a lot of one-on-one meetings. So I'm not afraid to tell you that I love my players, but I also have very high expectations. And when they didn't meet those expectations, I was disappointed. And often there was some kind of consequence with that. But that's where the reminder is like when the young man we were telling that quick story about Anthony. The next day, I brought him in. I said, Anthony, we love you, but you understand that is our expectation. The really neat thing, John, that story has another example because after everyone graduated, Anthony was the only player coming back from that state runner-up, and we still had a very good year the next year. But you talk about it because Anthony came from a very difficult home situation, single mom, and she was a good lady, but not very responsible. And you know what happened? Anthony's senior year, one of the sophomores, he lived right next to the school. Anthony slept over at his house the night before games, so he would never be late for free throws. So, but that's what, you talk about building a community and a village. That's pretty special. So,
And people with high expectations for what excellence looks like in practice
yeah,
and in life. I think there's so much emphasis on the scoreboard, and in doing so, we miss all the little baby pieces that go into allowing us to become successful, not only on the court, but more importantly, off. So,
right.
we're going to talk about a little bit of both in the next story. Take us back about 20 years, February 15th, 2006. What do you remember before the game?
So what you're talking about is a story that touches my heart 20 years later, still deeply. Is we had a young man, Jason McElwain. He's on the autism spectrum. Everybody calls him J-Mac, a name I tagged him because I couldn't pronounce his last name, and thank God he liked the nickname. But he tried out for our team 3 consecutive years, never made it. But he was so loyal. He served as our team manager the last 2 years on the varsity. And so his senior year, when he came out for the team and didn't make it again, I told him I want to give him a gift for his loyalty. And I think that's something that we can do is because the reason I wanted to give this young man a chance is because of his commitment, his attitude, his effort every single day to be a giver first. You talked about that, John. So I told him for his senior year, I was going to give him the gift. And the gift is that I was going to give him a uniform for our final home game where we honor the seniors before the game. And I will say, there were tears in my eyes when he embraced his parents before the game in uniform instead of the white shirt and black tie that he always wore. But so I was really hoping to get him the game. And my dream for him was I wanted to get him in with enough time so he could score a basket. I thought if he could score a basket, that's a memory he'll cherish for the rest of his life. So I did put him in with just over 4 minutes to go. When he came in, John, we had a good student body following. We had a pretty full gym. We had probably about 900 people there.
Did folks know you might put him in that night? Was that
Yeah,
already an undercurrent?
they did. The word got around school. So when he came in, what happened was we had a student body found. They called themselves the Six Men. And when Jason walked on the floor for the first time, our student body, what I didn't know, what Jason didn't know, is one of our parents, who was kind of our unofficial photographer, had made all these pictures of Jason's face and put them on a paint stick like a placard. And he gave them to the student body, and they showed those paint sticks. And I got so overwhelmed with emotion. And John, I sat down, and tears started to roll down my face. I couldn't believe it. He's now in his first varsity basketball game. And my thinking was, you know what, Jason, just you can get one basket. First time he gets the ball, he's in the right corner, he shoots a three, and I kind of glanced, John, and the whole gym rose and he misses the shot by like 6 feet. And I'm a strong person of faith, but I always kid people that I know you're not supposed to pray in the public schools, but dear God, was I praying. So the next possession, he has a much shorter shot from about 10 feet away. And this time it hits the backboard, hits the rim, and it falls off. And the crowd groans. I'm thinking, all right, God's starting to listen. We're getting a little closer. The third possession, he makes a three, and the place just erupts. And I'm thinking to myself, God must be a basketball fan. Not only has he scored, he's got a three-pointer. It can't get better than this. Then he comes down, he makes another three. And before I finish the story, I got to fast forward 6 months after the game. Jason's at the ESPY Awards. He's up for the greatest sports moment of the year. And there's 4 finalists for the award. And John, I kid you not, his idol was the late Kobe Bryant. Jason used to sign his name, Jason J. Mac Kobe McElwain. That's how much he liked Kobe. He goes to the ESPYs, and one of the other finalists for the same award is his idol. Kobe had scored 81 points in a game for the Lakers that year. He meets his idol, and he beats him out for the ESPY. Well, how's he do that? Well, he didn't just make two threes. He makes more and more. And the two things I'll close with this with about a minute to go, the place is just going bananas. And I get a tap on my shoulder, and I'm still sitting on the bench, tears still flowing down my face. I cannot believe what I'm witnessing. And I look behind me, and it's J Mac's mother, and she's bawling her eyes out, and she whispers in my ear, Coach, this is the best gift you could ever give my son. Of course, I cried hard. I was so touched. And then the game ends. The last possession, Spencer Porter, our opponent, and I want to give kudos to their coach and the players. They're really good sports. But the last possession, they score, and our player takes it out. Instead of throwing it to our point guard, he throws it right to Jason. And Jason's dribbling down. And I thought they were just going to let him go in and make a short shot. He like slows down. He's almost like for the camera. He throws up this 25-footer. And I'm thinking, Jason, don't shoot from there. You're going to ruin the moment. He launches it, swish. And the next thing I look, the whole gym runs on the floor, and our players put him up on their shoulders. And I'll never forget, because at that point, I have no idea how many points he has. And our public address announcer comes on and says, the leading scorer for Greece Athena tonight, J-Mac with 20 points, including 6 3-pointers. So
I'm speechless, and that's not usually where I am. I'm a motivational speaker and teacher and podcast host, and I can't tell if I'm speechless because I've seen the video 50 times, and I know the kid you're talking about and the challenges he faced in every day of his life,
Right.
and his mother faced every day of her life.
Yeah.
And the kids on the bench with pictures of this kid in front of them, and then your teammates, these other kids, and the way they passed him the ball, and I mean, the whole thing is so ridiculous
Yeah.
that for it to come true is miraculous. In 4 minutes, a kid who's been diagnosed with autism, who struggles in so many aspects of life,
Yeah.
drops down 20 points and is carried off the court by the student body.
Right. Yeah.
It's it's a love story, man, in a world that
Yeah.
has few of them to share.
Right.
How do you make sense out of this, coach?
Well, the interesting, I got to give you a little context. The ironic thing is that season's was the first half of the season the most difficult I ever had. We had a lot of internal strife and the team was divided. And I almost resigned if it hadn't been for my wife and my staff, because I was a big quote guy. I would give quotes every day. And they reminded me, coach, that one of your favorite quotes is when the going gets tough, the tough get going. And they really challenged me. So I hung in there. We finally got things going in the right direction. And I tell you what, the proudest thing for that is the four guys that were on the court with Jason. They were guys that hadn't played a lot either. And I never asked them to pass Jason the ball. Out of their own hearts, John, they passed the ball to him every possession. In fact, I still kid Jason to this day. Jason, I'm still looking for your first assist. You didn't pass it once. Uh, and then you talk about what Jason, why they loved him so much, because he was a giver. He was at practice every day. He'd rebound after practice for kids. He was just there. He'd bring them over to their house and have snacks. But here's the crazy thing is, John, after that, of course, it explodes all over the world. We're going to our postseason, and at that point in my career, I was the coach that couldn't win the big one. We had gone to the semifinals of our tournament 6 different times and I lost every time. But Jason's got to go back as our team manager because he had to play in 6 regular season games to be eligible for our postseason roster. And yet he embraces it. And John, we end up winning the semifinal game for the first time. We're playing in the championship game. We have a downtown arena seats about 10,000. Normally for championship Saturday, we would get 4 or 5,000, but because of the notoriety, it's sold out. And we start the game down like 13-2. And I'm like,
Hmm.
oh my gosh, but this team and Jason just rallied these guys and they hung together and we actually really won the game in the last minute and won our first championship that year. So, and then a little sidelight, Jason left and he graduated, he worked in town. And 2 years later, he asked if he could come back and volunteer. And we ended up winning 5 more championships. So he was definitely my good luck charm. So,
You met George Bush and
mhm,
Oprah and
yeah.
Kobe and on and on, and like this little senior that you send in who drops 20 puts you, the organization, your school, and certainly himself on the map. Was there a single highlight for you, not looking back on all that, whether it's meeting someone or being somewhere or feedback that you received?
I think meeting the president of the United States was pretty darn cool. He had come to Rochester and we got a chance to meet him when he came off of Air Force One and we went to a private room to meet him. But I'm very, very blessed. I was obviously a big basketball fan, so we were invited to the Final Four and we were interviewed by Jim Nance. It was a pleasure, and I got the chance to meet Dick Vitale there, and that kind of thing was really cool. And even just all the people that reached out, like John Calipari, that has been a
Yeah.
long time successful coach. And I'll tell you a little sidelight, but you talk about being a giver. It was really interesting. So when John Calipari took over at UMass, I was at Greece Olympia, and we were struggling the first couple of years. We were trying to turn the program around. And Calipari was at UMass, and he was starting to turn it around. And they got a game on ESPN, like a midnight game, because he just wanted to get exposure. This is many years ago. And I wrote him a note. And all of a sudden, it's a day of a game. I'm a Friday afternoon, and I get a call on my landline, back in those days, right?
Yeah.
And I says, "Is Coach Johnson there?" I said, "This is Coach." He says, "This is John Calipari." I thought he was busting my chest. And
Yep.
he goes, Coach, I have an interview in 10 minutes, but I so much touched with your note that I wanted to share some ideas on how to build culture. And he talked to me for like 10 minutes. And then many years later, he's calling me now as the University of Kentucky coach and congratulating me. So it was pretty quite wild situation.
I'm going to give you some stats from your career, and then you tell me which one you're most proud of, or one that I did not mention. But 11 division titles, including six in a row, five number one seed Section 5 tournament, two Monroe County champions, first or second place in the division in 21 of 22 seasons. That's crazy. I think 22 seasons consecutive without losing more than you won. One year, you had the highest GPA as a team in the entire state of New York. As you hear this brag sheet of success, do one of those or something else jump out at you as a highlight?
The two is because we really did pride ourselves on being student athletes. So I'm really proud of the fact that how well our kids did academically and that we were recognized. The other thing is because I think as a coach, you want consistency. Just as a leader, you want consistency. So the fact that we didn't have a losing season and we were one or two for like 20 consecutive years, is something I'm really proud of because I always kid people as a leader. You hear so much, in sports, but it's certainly in music, the one hit wonder, and where do they go?
Yeah.
Because it's hard. It's hard to be like, consistently at a high level. And so that's something that I took a great amount of pride in.
You teach around 7 keys to leadership. Is there one, as you look at it, that generates the greatest ripple effect through our lives?
Yes, and I think it's building trust. And something that I think I do a little bit unique is when I do a leadership presentation, one of the things I'll ask the audience is how many of you believe trust is essential in building a great team? And 100% hands, doesn't matter where I speak, okay? But then I kind of challenge them and I say, well, how many of you have an intentional trust plan? And they kind of look at me like, what are you talking about? And so my last two programs, we developed these 3 keys to building trust. And that's what we adopted because you asked me one of my proudest things and being consistent. And I think that's because we really built trust and the guys could count on us. And the
Right.
one thing that I really push leaders is that if you got to be consistent aligning your words and actions. If you're saying one thing and doing another and you're not modeling the expectations day in and day out, it breaks trust very easily.
Hmm. You're big into mission. And I
Yeah.
think, the hospitals who brought us in are big into mission and faith-based groups are big into mission. And maybe some of the
Yeah.
guys out there are big into mission and ladies. But the idea of a team being big into mission may not seem as important to our listeners at first. So why is
Right.
mission so important?
Yeah, I did a lot of studying because obviously I was an athletic coach. So I studied a lot. And then, when I started speaking in business, I started studying a lot more. And for the most part, going back to being consistent. If you're stay at a high level, whether it's a business or an athletic team, is that the mission's got to be bigger than just winning games in sports or making profit. They're both important. As a coach, if you keep losing year in, year out, you probably don't stay as the head coach. And
Yeah.
if you have a business and you don't make profit, you don't stay alive as a business either. But I really feel if you're going to build consistency, then you've got to have a mission that's bigger than yourself. And that's why, we talked about developing winners on and off the court and really getting that. And so, but I think it's really important because almost all leaders understand about mission and even may have a mission statement. But the thing is, that's why I think as leaders, you got to be the CRO, the chief reminding officer. You got to be living the mission and sharing the mission every single day. And, that's telling stories, being an example, like being on time, and then you walk in late. You're not living the mission. So those
Right.
are all things that you got to be really think. Like one of the things we told our players all the time. And I'll tell you a quick side story is that you are always on stage. And John, like when I took over the last program, I was at Greece Athena for 20 years, and we really wanted to take pride on how we looked. So at road games, our players were required to wear a shirt and tie. In one game, I decided not to wear a shirt and tie, mainly because I didn't like them. And so I didn't wear it. And I'll never forget when we got back to the school, I was walking in my car, and one of my parents said, "Hey, coach, not for nothing, but you always talk about being a great model for our sons, and you asked them to wear a shirt and tie. How come you didn't?" And I was stunned. And then I thought for a moment, I said, "You know what, sir? You're absolutely right. I made a mistake and I will make amends."
Wow.
And after that, I always wear a shirt and tie because that's how important it is.
So you're dealing with parents like that who are bold and
Yeah.
direct and honest, and some
Yeah.
who are maybe a little bit more bold than they should be, but
Right.
also with kids.
Yeah.
We all struggle with self-worth and self-doubt, self-belief.
Yeah.
How do you coach, create belief in someone who doesn't yet believe in themselves? Or if they've lost belief. Many of us come in certain we're great at something, and then life proves us that we're not. So how
Yeah.
do you reinstill belief in someone who has lost it?
I think one is you really got to be cognizant. In fact, we used to tell our coaches there are some days we just got to have a be positive practice where we just are consistently trying to catch people doing right and just reinforcing that. And then the other thing is in sports and certainly in basketball, we filmed every game. So when a kid is going through some difficult times, we would break up and put a little film clip and we'd show them and go, "Hey, see, you're capable of doing this," because
Yeah.
there's nothing like the visual. And so between the visual and the verbal, where you're consistently reinforcing with them when they go through a slump, and then encourage them. Like we had good players that would go through shooting funks. And you get them in one on one and say, "John, I know you're missing right now, but as long as you're taking good shots, you're free to go. You
Yeah.
got to shoot it and believe because we believe in you and we know you can do it." So, you just got to build their confidence when things aren't going well. And sometimes on the other end, when they get a little too cocky, you got to make sure you humble them as well. So,
That's probably a little bit more enjoyable from a coaching perspective of bringing
yeah,
someone to their knees rather than helping them rise again.
yeah,
So you've got so many quotes that I wrote down from your book, but I'm just going to walk you through three and tell me what you mean.
yeah.
They're obvious, I think, but what is obvious is so frequently missed. So here we go.
Mhm.
Number one, dreams really do come true.
That was kind of my epiphany after Jason's game, and I started to be asked to speak. And I was like, "So what message do I want to make?" And that's what really hit me is like that I believe most people have a dream, and a lot of people have a big dream. But most people, as I've traveled around, don't think their dream can come true. And so they need people that are going to encourage them and show them that, someone like yourself that's overcome a lot of challenges. Certainly with Jason, here's a young man that had a lot of obstacles, yet he did something that most people don't believe it can happen. So
Right.
miracles are created every day, and I think that we need people out there that are inspiring and giving people hope.
Mm. So good and so true. Because the world has given us the exact opposite. They're
Yeah,
shoving despair down our throats and then forcing
absolutely.
us to pay attention to it.
Yeah.
So, quote number two, every day is an opportunity to grow and to build good habits. Why is that important?
Because I think you're the manifestation of your habits. It's funny. Fortunately, I've kept myself in good shape, but it's because of my habits. Sometimes you haven't seen someone in 10 years and they gain 50 pounds. And they didn't gain those 50 pounds because they ate one extra burger one night. That's a manifestation of just consistently, unfortunately, bad habits. So it's something that I really try to model with my habits as far as the mental, the physical, the spiritual, in getting routines and then trying to teach our young people. They have to figure out what their own routines are, but realize that the habits that you build. I've read a lot of books on habits, and one of the books that really jumped out to me was a keystone habit. What kind of spurs everything out? And for me, it was exercise. Like no matter how busy I was when I was teaching, coaching, had a family, is that I still found time to exercise. And
Hmm.
that kind of spurred everything else for me. So I think that you got to find something that's meaningful to you to start a daily practice because it's hard to add 10 habits, but you can do one or two.
That's right.
And that's what I think you really got to focus in on.
Third quote, coach, here it comes. Listen at least twice as much as you talk. Why is that important?
Well, it's something as a leader I didn't do very well early. I was the gabber and what didn't listen very well. But the more that I study leadership, the more I realize you have two ears and one mouth, and there's a reason for that because you should listen at least twice as much as you talk. And that was something, John, I dramatically changed that helped me, I think, immensely as a coach, is that I had captains meetings every week, usually on Mondays, because I usually didn't play on Mondays. And early in my career, it was all about my agenda. In the second half, I changed it completely and I became the question asker. I would come in and say, "Hey, how are things going right now? What do you think we should focus in on? Is there anybody really struggling on the team that we need to support this week? How can I coach you better this week?" I would just ask questions and listen, and
Right.
that helped me immensely as a leader.
Final question, just broadly speaking, there's so many folks who feel like they're on the end of the bench. They are JMac, not only
Yeah.
athletically, but relationally and spiritually and professionally and financially. And you name the area, they just feel like they're the end of the bench and they're not getting in. They've lost that spark sometimes for
Mhm.
life.
Right.
Coach, what can we take away from this conversation that might reignite that spark and help us get our game face back on and have a renewed optimism for tomorrow?
I really truly believe it's a mindset of service. When you think of ways that you can spread anything you can do to, but it can start as simple as just spreading kindness. I think the world needs more of that. So as much as just opening a door for somebody or giving someone a smile or asking how they are, and then obviously you can get deeper than that. But I think the more that you can spread kindness, because I think when you are grateful and you appreciate what's going on, it's hard to be depressed. Those two don't work hand in hand. So I think if you're always thinking the mindset, how can I help the world? How can I help people a little bit better? And really just discover what your mission is. It might be that you want to help all animals in the world, whatever it happens to be, but find ways that you can give back and serve first.
Coach Jim Johnson, winner of 400 plus games, but more than that, a winner of so many hearts and minds. We have 7 questions that we wrap every conversation. They're called the Live Inspired Seven.
Yeah.
So the very first for you, my friend, is what's been the most impactful book you've ever read?
I'm an avid reader of well over 1,000 books, and I zeroed down to two. One was Seven Habits of Highly Effective People because that really talked about having our own personal mission statement. So that was it. And then there's a book called The Season of Life by Jeffrey Max.
Man, that's a
Mark's,
great
yeah.
book.
And it's about a former pro football player, Joe Ehrman, and that was so impactful for me as far as just life lessons. So. And I've read so many great books, but those two jumped out to me.
Well, I've interviewed about as many guys as you've read books,
Yeah,
and I've never heard anybody else say The Season of Life. And it's a book I read 20 plus years ago. And it's the first time love was a concept that was really brought forward into athletics and leadership in a meaningful way
yeah,
that led to like revolutionary style of success.
right,
And it wasn't the focus on the scoreboard. I think it was a Baltimore high school team. It was
right.
the focus on loving the one in front of you well.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
it's a beautiful idea. So,
yeah,
season of
sure.
life. What's one positive characteristic or one trait that you possessed as a little kid growing up, oldest of 6 outside of Rochester, that you wish you exhibited as brilliantly today?
My imagination. As a kid, I always created like different games and stuff. And I still did some of that as an adult, but not nearly as much. And I think just the ability to just sit and imagine is something I did a lot as a kid. Like I meditate every day, so that's helped me some. But that's something that we tend to sometimes lose. And I did, because having a good imagination is really special. So.
If your home caught fire and you have an opportunity of running in and grabbing one thing that matters to you. So all the people, all the animals are out safely, but you run on back and grab one thing. What do you come back outside with?
This is a hard one because it definitely would be my family pictures. We lost my dad a year and a half. I have a picture of him and my son, and I would definitely have a picture of my son and my wife. I will say one little sidelight because I obviously was a coach for a long time. I do have a signed Pyramid of Success from John Wood, so if that was available, I'd grab that too.
I'm glad you grabbed the pyramid of success. If you could sit on a bench on a gorgeous day and have a long conversation with anyone living or deceased, who would you like seated next to you?
So that one is two. John Wooden would be one just because I just admired him from afar. In fact, I was a kid when he was coaching at UCLA, and that was back before cable TV. So I would beg my parents on Saturday night to be able to stay up and watch a UCLA game. Uh, I just admired what he was a leader. And then the other one, just because of the traumatic time he lived and what he stood for, would be Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
Thank you. What's the best advice Wooden, King, or anyone else ever gave you?
I think it really came more with Covey's book. And the best advice I gained was to really understand your why. Why were you put on this earth? That famous Mark Twain quote, the two most important days in your life is the day you're born and the day you find out why. And I developed a personal mission statement that's helped me immensely because I always tell leaders, if you don't know what you stand for, you fall for anything.
What is your personal mission statement?
To be an outstanding role model that makes a positive difference in the world by helping others make their dreams come true.
You've done it.
Thank you.
What advice would you give yourself at age 20? So if you could go back in time to that junior in college, what advice does he need to hear?
It would be that one of my all-time favorite quotes is attitudes are contagious, is yours worth catching. And when I didn't make the team, my attitude stunk. And the one thing I used to really tell our players is for us to be outstanding, we got to be great in the things you can control. And one of the things you can control is your attitude.
Coach, when you say this stuff to kids, whether you raise them and they share your last name or they wear your jersey, does it eventually sink in that you're giving them something that is actually important, or do they shrug it off and ignore you? Because some of this sounds like platitudes.
Yeah, I think that's why you got to keep repeating and keep living the message because yes, when you come in and you say that one day they're unsure on, but that's why building trust is so important so that they do believe in you and that you who you say you are day in and day out.
Final question for Coach Jim Johnson.
Yeah,
It has been said, my friend, that all great people and coaches can have their lives summed up in one sentence. How would you like your one sentence to read?
that I was a model worth following.
Coach Jim Johnson was indeed a model worth following. Just ask his players over the decades that he served, his family over the decades they looked up to him, or look back at the last hour of this conversation. The pebbles of your success, my friend, have been dropped everywhere, and the ripples are profound. I want to thank you for truly embracing defeat and becoming a better version of yourself through humility and faithfulness, focus on others, and in inspiring others to become the best versions of themselves.
Thank you, John. It was a real blessing and a real honor to be on your podcast and talk to you.
Coach, where can we learn more about your work?
Best would be just go to my website, coachjimjohnson.com. We have a free newsletter, a free weekly blog. We have videos on there, and also I'm real proud of the podcast we've been doing. Not as long as you, we've been doing it for over 5 years, and we're really excited to have you on this fall. It's called the Limitless Leadership Lounge.
Well, my friends, you're listening to a model of the Limitless Leadership Lounge. His name is Coach Jim Johnson. My name is John O'Leary, and today is our collective day. What a gift it is. Live with your soul on fire.